Hello and welcome. In our last video we talked about how we can add CSS to our files, and I told us of 3 ways we can do that. The first one is inline, where we inside our tags we can begin to add our style, and when we add the style it works. And I told you this is not a good practice, and I don't think I'll be using it at all in this course, and in your project you're not even advised to use it. I just had to tell you that it exists. And then the second one is internal style sheet, where inside of our header we can create the style tag and then begin to add our CSS inside of this, and it automatically works. Then the third one is using an external style sheet, where we put our CSS outside and then we link it using a link. So I'll close this now. In this video we want to talk about selectors, and I have just done something very simple here. I created a file called selectors.html, and I added our boilerplate, and I gave a title of CSS selectors, and I added an internal style sheet. The reason why I'm not using external for this video is because of the fact that I want everything to be in a place, because this is like a tutorial, so you get to, instead of switching between two files, so I just put the style here so you get to see it as it was. When we begin to work on different projects, that is where I'll be using an external style sheet so that all the CSS will be in one place. So this is what I'll be doing at the beginning of every video. I'll just automatically do this and load it by the side, so that I won't spend more time showing us how it is done. I believe you know how you can do this. Add your boilerplate and get set. So what we are going to do now is I'll start by putting a div. Remember when we talked about inline elements, I told us that we are going to start using div and span when we begin to do CSS. And if we hover around the div, we'll see that it's telling us that the div element has no special meaning at all. It represents its children, so it's like a parent representing the children we're going to be putting inside. So I'll just start adding something, a header too, and I'll give this about HTML, and let's say we want to talk about HTML, and inside of this lorem let's say 50, lorem 50, and then I'll create another container and lorem h2 first, let's say about Python, and lorem 30. So if I save this, you see we have this. So we're talking about selectors in this video, and selectors is just a means you want to style something here. So how do you select which one you want to style? I'll start with, and we're going to be doing that inside the internal style sheet. So let's say we want to select the header. So I'll remember the headers are h2, so I'll pick all the h2 on the page. Let's say we want to give them a color of, let's say, red. So if I do this, you see all the h2 are red, and that's how you can select that. But then another thing might arise. You don't want to you don't want to select all the h2. You want to only change this one, and you want to leave this one as it is. Now that is where we begin to talk about what is known as class and IDs. When you talk about class, I'll just put them here as comments so they don't get to show, and IDs it will show. So when we talk about class, you want to create something that will be used a couple of times. You want to write a style and use it several times, you use class. But if you want to write an ID that will be used only once, that is where you are going to use IDs. So while we continue, you will see it work. So I just have to put this outside because it does not belong to any of the containers, just like a comment. So now moving forward, we want to style only this one. So inside this h2, I can give an ID of, let's say, red header or red heading. So if I save this now and I come here and I put here, you represent ID using this £, red heading. So if I save it, you see that it is the only one that is affected. But I can as well as remove this here, and I save it. It will still work because it goes through this, and then it finds out that it is only this one that has this ID of red heading. So that is about IDs. But if you want something that you'll be using often, it's not ideal to use an ID. In that instance, you use a class, and that will work. So if I do this now, it is not going to work, because for class, while you use the £sign for ID, for class you use dot. So you see now it works. So you should take note of that. When you're using class inside the CSS, you should start with dot, but when you're using an ID inside the CSS, you should start with the £sign. I believe you understand what I'm saying. All right, let's move forward. The next thing is we are going to see how we can style some other things here. Now inside of this, let's say now we want to target the elements which are inside of this ID, inside of this first div. So I can give this first div an ID because it is just this ID. So I can give this first div an ID of, let's say, HTML, and then this second one I'll give it an ID of Python. And then for this first one, we want to give, that is for HTML, we want to give let's say a background, a somewhat like a dark background. So we're going to look at colors, but this is one color. So if I save, you can see something here. When we talk about colors, we're going to see what this is known as hex, but we're going to talk about it in details. So you can see, and then let's say in the second one, let's say it is called Python. The ID is Python. We want to give a background of, let's say, it's somewhat like a white background. So if I save this, you can, if you look very well, you see some kind of shade of white here. So that is how you can target a particular container. That is why the div is important. So if I want to use this several times, now I'll give it a class, and I'll come here and I'll change this to a class as well. So if I save this, it remains. I believe you understand what we are doing. So that is that about selectors. So let's move further to see some other things we can do. Yes, now we need to understand our naming convention. It is very important, because you might want to change this along the line. So it is not good to give something like this a red heading. What happens if you change it to green? Doesn't mean you have to change. So instead you can call this primary. Your naming is very important. Primary heading, and then that means you have to come to this place and change to primary heading, and if you save, it retains the color again. So another thing we'll see is this. Let's say we want to target this this paragraph here, this paragraph which is inside of this container. So how do we target this particular paragraph and do something to it? So this is how we do it. We'll come here and we select this ID, and then inside this ID we want to target this paragraph. So this is how we do it. We want to select the ID of HTML, and then inside this ID we want to select the paragraph, and we can, let's style this, let's give it a color of, let's say, white. So you can see now that that is how we can target something which is inside of another thing. So I'll put a span here, and then inside this span I want to say hello my friend. So if I save, you're just going to see that here. But if I want to style just that, I can come here and give it a class of, let's say, friend. Whatever you want is fine, but just try to give a good name which you can understand. Now I can come here, I can style this like this because it is a class of friend. So I can say color equal blue. So if I save that, you see that inside this its color is changed. So that is where this thing comes handy, and that is how you can select. Next, I will show us something else. Let's say I want to target these two at the same time. If I want to target them at the same time, I'll select HTML, which is an ID with a comma, and I want to also target the Python, and then inside of this, targeting both of them, I'll give them a border of 1 pixel solid, let's say pound CCC. So if I save, you see it has this light shade around there, you can't see it. So let me just give a color, we can see pound 555555. So if I save this now, this is quite thick and you can see it around both of them. So I can also do some other thing, padding, let's say 3 pixel. So it's padding, what it does, we're still going to look at it, but it just moves this thing away from the container. Let's give it 30 so you can see that very well. So you can see what padding does, it removes from the side. But when we talk about the box model, we're going to see what padding does. So I believe you get the picture of what it does. As we proceed, we're going to use this often and you're going to get a hang of it very well. So in the next video, we're going to talk about fonts.